July 2, 1943. Castellamare del Golfo Airfield, Sicily. The pilot of a Focke-Wulf 190 never saw the P-40 Warhawk diving from the sun-dappled Mediterranean sky, not until a storm of .50 caliber machine gun fire tore through his fuselage. The German fighter spun wildly, plummeting toward the dry, dusty hills of Sicily below. First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a 22-year-old from Brazil, Indiana, had just done what Luftwaffe commanders swore was impossible. A black pilot had shot down one of their elite fighters. That afternoon, Hall's ground crew painted a tiny swastika on the side of his P-40L Warhawk, marking the first of 112 enemy aircraft the Germans would eventually call Schwarz-Vogelmänner, Black Birdmen, would destroy. In Nazi Germany, racial dogma labeled black people Untermenschen, subhuman. The regime claimed they lacked the smarts to master complex machines like fighter planes or the courage to fight in combat. The Nuremberg laws banned marriages between Germans and people of African descent, and Nazi propaganda flooded Europe with lies about black inferiority. But 10,000 feet above the Mediterranean, that ideology was about to crash into reality. Over the next 2 years, 992 trained pilots from Tuskegee, Alabama, men who defied American segregation to earn their wings, would take down not just German planes, but the racist myths that defined both Nazi and U.S. attitudes toward black servicemen. What those Luftwaffe pilots didn't know as they climbed to intercept American bombers in 1943 was that they faced some of the most rigorously trained, fiercely motivated pilots in the entire U.S. Army Air Forces, USAF. These men had overcome hurdles white pilots never imagined: segregated training bases with shoddy equipment, racist instructors who told them they didn't have what it takes to fly, a military that saw them as little more than a social experiment. They logged 300 flight hours in training, 100 more than white cadets, and carried into battle not just the weight of serving their country, but the pressure to prove an entire race's worth to a skeptical nation. The numbers would soon tell the truth in the skies over Europe: 15,000 combat sorties, 1,578 missions, 112 aerial victories, and a bomber escort loss rate far lower than white fighter groups. Even the most fanatical Nazis couldn't ignore what those stats proved: their racial theories were a lie. The road to Hall's victory began not in combat, but in the harsh reality of American segregation. As early as 1925, the U.S. Army War College published a report titled Employment of Negro Manpower in War that declared, compared to the white man, he is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character, lacking in initiative, and unsuited for leadership roles. This official stance claimed black soldiers couldn't handle technical jobs like flying, or lead in combat. But black Americans were already proving that wrong. Eugene Bullard, a black man from Georgia, had flown for France's Lafayette Escadrille in World War I because the U.S. military refused to let him pilot a plane. Bessie Coleman, a sharecropper's daughter from Texas, earned her pilot's license in France in 1921. No American flight school, white or black, would take her. By the 1930s, Chicago's Coffee School of Aeronautics, founded by black aviator Cornelius R. Coffee, had trained dozens of black civilian pilots, showing the world that skill behind the controls didn't depend on skin color. These pioneers laid the groundwork, but it would take a global war to force the U.S. military to open its cockpit doors. As war loomed over Europe in the late 1930s, civil rights leaders pushed harder for black inclusion in military aviation. Walter White of the NAACP, labor leader A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie, later America's first black federal judge, pressed the Roosevelt administration with a simple, unanswerable question: how could America fight for democracy abroad while denying it to black citizens at home? Their efforts paid off on April 3, 1939, when Public Law 18, the Civilian Pilot Training Act, was amended. It required the program to include one or more schools designated by the Civil Aeronautics Authority for the training of any Negro air pilot. It was a small win. Wrapped in segregation, the schools would be all black. But it was a crack in the military's racial wall. When Franklin Roosevelt ran for an unprecedented third term in 1940, he needed black votes in key northern cities like Chicago and Detroit. To secure that support, he pressured the War Department to expand black military roles. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson announced the creation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, the first all-black flying unit in U.S. history. But the military made its low expectations clear: this was an experiment. If the 99th failed, the program would end, and segregation in military aviation would likely last for decades. Captain Benjamin O. Davis Jr. knew the stakes when he led 26 pilots of the 99th Fighter Squadron to North Africa in April 1943. The son of Benjamin O. Davis Sr., America's first black general, Davis had endured 4 years of silent treatment at West Point. No white cadet spoke to him outside of official duties. He graduated in 1936, ranking 35th out of 276, but the Army Air Corps refused to let him lead white troops, so he was assigned to an all-black infantry unit. Now, as commander of the 99th, he led men who carried not just their own dreams of proving themselves, but the hopes of 13 million black Americans watching to see if their community could break the racial ceiling in the military. The 99th arrived at Farjuna Airfield, Tunisia, in May 1943, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group. Their commander, Colonel William W. Momeyer, made no secret of his skepticism about black pilots. He stuck them with boring patrol missions over the Mediterranean, keeping them far from the real fight in Sicily and Italy. He wanted them to fail, and when they didn't immediately shine in their limited roles, he had his excuse. In June 1943, Momeyer filed a report claiming the 99th lacked aggressiveness and recommended pulling them from combat. The 99th got their first real taste of battle on June 2, 1943, an attack on Pantelleria, an Italian-held island in the Mediterranean. They flew worn P-40 Warhawks, hand-me-downs from white units, already obsolete by 1943. As they climbed toward their targets, a group of German Bf-109 fighters swooped in. The Tuskegee pilots held formation, shielding the B-25 bombers they were escorting, and chased off the Germans without losing a single plane. No enemy fighters were shot down that day, but the Germans learned a critical lesson: these black pilots wouldn't break under pressure. July 2, 1943, changed everything. Charles Hall was on his 8th mission, escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers to attack Castellammare del Golfo airfield in western Sicily. As the bombers dropped their payloads, 2 Focke-Wulf 190s dived in, aiming for damaged planes. Hall later told USAF investigators, "I saw 2 FW-190s trailing the bombers right after the bombs fell. They came in fast from behind, so I broke off from my wingman and cut between them and the bombers. I turned inside the Jerry's left bank, got on his tail, and let loose a long burst. I saw my tracers hit his fuselage, smoke poured out, and he went into a steep dive. He tried to pull up left, but he just dropped off and crashed straight into the ground." When Hall landed back at base, the airfield exploded in celebration. Black ground crews, who'd endured months of insults from white personnel, who were barred from shared mess halls and latrines, finally had proof to answer every slight. Hall's victory was the first aerial kill by a black American pilot in U.S. military history. To both the Germans and the U.S. military, it sent a clear message: black pilots could fight, and win. By January 1944, the 99th had been in combat for 7 months, flying missions over Sicily, Italy, and North Africa. But Momeyer's negative report had reached top brass, and General Henry Hap Arnold, head of the USAF, was ready to shut down the experiment. Then came the Battle of Anzio, a turning point for the Tuskegee Airmen. On January 27, 1944, the Luftwaffe launched massive raids on Allied troops dug in at the Anzio beachhead, a critical landing zone south of Rome. 15 pilots from the 99th, flying their aging P-40s, met a squadron of superior FW-190s over the battlefield. What happened next silenced the critics for good. Over 2 days of brutal combat, the 99th shot down between 8 and 13 enemy aircraft, sources vary slightly, but all confirm a decisive win. Captain Charles Hall added 2 more kills to his record, bringing his total to 3. Flying outdated planes against better-trained German pilots, the Tuskegee Airmen destroyed more enemy aircraft in 48 hours than they had in their first 7 months of combat. The War Department launched an official study, comparing the 99th to other P-40 squadrons in the Mediterranean. The results? The 99th performed on par with or better than white units of the same size and experience. Anzio proved beyond doubt, black pilots could excel in combat, if given the chance. In May 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group was formed, merging the 99th with 3 new all-black squadrons, the 100th, 301st, and 302nd. Their orders would turn them from outcasts to legends. They joined the 15th Air Force, based in Italy, and took on the most dangerous job in aerial combat, escorting heavy bombers on long-range raids deep into Nazi Germany. Colonel Benjamin Davis, now promoted to lead the 332nd, gathered his pilots at Ramitelli Airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast for a critical briefing. His voice was firm: "Our job isn't to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home. Every bomber we protect is a victory, more important than any enemy fighter we shoot down." That order defined the 332nd's mission: stay with the bombers, no matter what. In June 1944, General Nathan Twining, commander of the 15th Air Force, ordered a new marking system for fighter groups, so bombers could identify their escorts quickly. Some groups got red noses, others, red wing bands. The 332nd got something bolder: entire tail sections painted crimson. When they upgraded to P-51 Mustangs, faster, more advanced planes that replaced the obsolete P-40s, those red tails, paired with red propeller spinners and nose bands, made them instantly recognizable. The red tails were born, and their reputation grew fast. The first bomber crews to fly with red tail escorts didn't know their protectors were black. They only knew one thing: these fighters stayed close. Unlike white fighter groups, which often chased enemy planes for easy kills, leaving bombers vulnerable, the red tails never abandoned their charge. Word spread through the bomber squadrons: request the red tails if you can. They'll get you home. July 18, 1944, tested the red tails like never before. Colonel Davis led 66 P-51 Mustangs to meet a formation of B-17 flying fortresses heading to attack a Luftwaffe base at Memmingen, Germany, deep in enemy territory. The bombers were late. Davis faced a choice: return to base, and leave the bombers unescorted, or circle in hostile airspace, burning precious fuel. He chose to wait. 45 minutes later, the bombers finally arrived, and so did the Luftwaffe. Around 100 German fighters, FW-190s and Bf-109s, attacking from all directions, trying to break the Red Tails' defensive screen. The Germans had studied the Red Tails' tactics and thought sheer numbers would make them scatter. For 20 minutes, the sky over Memmingen was chaos: twisting planes, tracer fire, exploding bombers. The 332nd fought fiercely, claiming 11 to 12 enemy kills, but 15 B-17s went down. The Red Tails lost 3 pilots that day: Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown, all shot down while defending the bombers. Critics in the USAF jumped on the high bomber losses, claiming it proved black pilots couldn't handle major battles. But later analysis told the real story: the Red Tails had arrived to find German fighters already attacking the bombers. They walked into an impossible situation. Without their defense, the entire formation might have been wiped out. As one B-17 pilot later said, "Those Red Tails didn't leave us. They fought like hell to get us out of there. If they hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here talking about it." By March 1945, the Luftwaffe's conventional fighters were a shadow of their former selves, decimated by combat and fuel shortages. But Germany had one last weapon: the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It flew at 540 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied propeller plane. The Me-262 was a technological leap, and it threatened to turn the tide of the air war. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd got their most dangerous assignment yet, escorting B-17s on a 1,600-mile round-trip mission to Berlin, targeting the Daimler-Benz tank factory, the heart of Germany's armored vehicle production. Intelligence warned that Jägerschwader 7, JG-7, the Luftwaffe's elite jet unit, would defend the target. Colonel Davis led 43 P-51 Mustangs into the heart of the Reich, knowing they'd be outmatched in speed. As they neared Berlin, the jets appeared, dozens of Me-262s, the largest jet force ever assembled for a single attack. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, a 22-year-old from Washington, D.C., had studied the Me-262's flaws in training, fast in a straight line, but clumsy at low speeds, with slow acceleration during takeoff and landing. "We knew we couldn't outrun them, so we didn't try," Brown later recalled. "We flew tight formation, waited for them to make their passes, then turned into their blind spots, right behind their tails, where they couldn't hit us." Brown locked onto one Me-262, pulled up in a 15-degree climb, and fired 3 long bursts from 2,000 feet. "I saw my tracers hit his engine, sparks flew, smoke poured out," he said. Almost right away, the pilot bailed out from about 24,500 feet. "I watched him float down, knowing I'd just shot down a jet, something no one thought we could do." Lieutenant Earl Lane pulled off an even more impressive feat. He shot down a Me-262 with a 2,000-yard deflection shot. Using the new K-14 computing gun sight, he calculated the jet's speed and path, hitting a target that wasn't even in his crosshairs when he fired. Lieutenant Charles Brantley claimed the third jet victory that day. Destroying 3 Me-262s in one mission was unprecedented. It was more jet kills than most Allied fighter groups achieved in the entire war. The 332nd was awarded the Distinguished Unit Citation, the highest honor for a military unit, for extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy. Not all encounters ended in victory. 32 Red Tail pilots became prisoners of war, POWs, and their experiences in German camps revealed a bitter irony: Nazi ideology clashed with military reality. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson was shot down on August 12, 1944, during his 19th mission. His P-51 took anti-aircraft fire over southern France while he strafed German radar sites. He bailed out, was captured by German soldiers, and taken to a POW camp for interrogation. The German officer leading the questioning had shockingly detailed intelligence about the 332nd. He knew about Ramitelli Airfield, our squadron commanders, even small things, like where my parents lived in Detroit, Jefferson recalled in a 2010 interview. "He told me my dad was a high school teacher and my mom's maiden name was Johnson. Their intel was scary thorough, they'd been watching us closely." Inside Stalag Luft 3, a POW camp for Allied airmen in Poland, Jefferson found something he never had at home: equality. White POWs from bomber crews often approached him to thank the Red Tails for their protection. One B-17 pilot told me he'd requested our escort 3 times because we never left the bombers, Jefferson said. "Here I was, in a Nazi POW camp, being treated more equally by white Americans than I would be back in the U.S. The irony hit me hard." When the war ended, Jefferson returned to New York, but at the disembarkation point, he was immediately segregated. He had to use separate restrooms and dining halls from the white POWs he'd lived with in the camp. While German pilots respected the Red Tails enough to call them Schwarzvogelmänner, American bomber crews became their loudest advocates. These men, who faced death on every mission, didn't care about skin color, only survival. They told stories about the Red Tails, how they waggled their wings in greeting when joining a formation, how their tight, disciplined flights never broke, how they stayed with damaged bombers even when it meant risking their own lives. They called them Red Tail Angels, a name that stuck long after the war. The numbers backed up the bomber crew's trust. Air Force historian Dr. Daniel Hallman's research showed that bombers escorted by the 332nd lost only 27 aircraft to enemy fighters during the war, compared to an average of 46 for other P-51 groups in the 15th Air Force. The Red Tails maintained this superior rate even though they flew some of the longest, most dangerous missions, raids on Berlin, Vienna, and Bucharest, targets deep in enemy territory where Luftwaffe resistance was fiercest. By war's end, the Tuskegee Airmen had built a combat record that shattered every pre-war myth about black military capability. Their achievements were documented in USAF reports and bomber crew testimonies, but mainstream newspapers mostly ignored them. Here's the facts. Combat operations: 1,578 combat missions flown, 15,000 plus individual sorties, 179 bomber escort missions, 311 total missions for the 15th Air Force. Enemy aircraft destroyed, 112 shot down in aerial combat, 150 destroyed on the ground, 3 Mi-262 jets taken down on March 24, 1945, the single largest jet kill tally by any Allied unit in one mission. Ground targets destroyed, 950 rail cars, trucks, and vehicles, 254 locomotive engines, 1 Italian destroyer, Giuseppe Missori, damaged beyond repair on June 25, 1944, during a strafing mission off Italy's coast. Protection record: 27 bombers lost to enemy fighters, versus 46 average for other groups, superior protection across all 179 escort missions. Individual achievements: Lee Archer, 4 confirmed wins, including 2 FW-190s in one mission, Joseph Ellsbury, 4 victories, 3 of them FW-190s on July 12, 1944, Edward Toppins, 4 wins, Clarence Lester, 3 kills in one mission on July 18, 1944. Decorations: 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, DFCs, for 332nd pilots, 744 Air Medals, 14 Bronze Stars, 8 Purple Hearts, 3 Distinguished Unit Citations for the 99th Fighter Squadron, 1 Distinguished Unit Citation for the 332nd Fighter Group. Human cost: 66 pilots killed in action, 32 captured as POWs, 84 killed in training and non-combat missions, reminder of how dangerous flight training was, even in peacetime. Their journey from mockery to respect wasn't just about courage, it came from superior training and technology, which the Red Tails used with precision. At Tuskegee Army Air Field in Alabama, the program was intentionally tough. Pilots flew more hours than white cadets, practiced formation flying until it was second nature, knowing discipline would be their edge, and passed stricter academic tests. The washout rate at Tuskegee was 60%, compared to 40% for white cadets. Only the best survived. Colonel Noel F. Parrish, the white commander of Tuskegee Air Field, called them a super-selected group, men who'd overcome not just the challenge of flying, but the weight of racism. The planes the Red Tails flew told their own story of growing respect. The 99th started with hand-me-down P-40 Warhawks, tough, but outdated by 1943. Their liquid-cooled Allison engines lacked power at high altitudes, making them no match for German FW-190s and Bf-109s. But the Tuskegee pilots turned the P-40's flaws into strengths. They used its superior turning ability to outmaneuver Germans and its rugged build to survive damage. When they got P-51 Mustangs in July 1944, everything changed. The North American P-51D Mustang was American industrial perfection. Its Packard-built Merlin engine, licensed from Britain's Rolls-Royce, hit 437 miles per hour. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns could take down any enemy plane. And with drop tanks, it had a 1,600-mile range, enough to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The Red Tails were now equals to any fighter unit in the war. Behind every pilot who shot down a German plane stood dozens of unsung heroes, mechanics, armorers, crew chiefs, and supply clerks. Of the roughly 16,000 Tuskegee Airmen who served, fewer than 1,000 were pilots. The rest kept the Red Tails flying, often with next to nothing. Ramitelli Airfield was primitive compared to other American bases, dirt runways that turned to mud and rain, few hangars, and scarce spare parts. The 332nd was always last in line for supplies. White units got priority for engines, tires, and ammo. But their aircraft availability rate, the percentage of planes ready for combat, matched or beat white units. It was a testament to their skill and dedication. The ground crews faced combat too. German raids on Ramitelli were rare but deadly. On March 24, 1944, a night raid killed several support personnel and damaged dozens of planes. Undeterred, the men worked through the attack, pulling burning aircraft away from fuel dumps, patching holes, and fixing engines overnight so the Red Tails could fly missions the next day. "We didn't have time to stop," one mechanic later said. "Every plane we fixed was a plane that could protect the bombers, and keep our pilots alive." The strategic bombing campaign over Europe was the ultimate test for the Tuskegee Airmen. A single B-17 Flying Fortress cost $238,000 over $4 million today, and carried 10 highly trained crew members. Losing one bomber was a major setback. That's why protecting them mattered more than shooting down enemy planes, and why the Red Tails' focus on escort duty made them invaluable. Colonel Davis summed it up best when he told his pilots, "Anyone can shoot down a fighter if they abandon their post. It takes discipline to stay with the bombers when the enemy is running. That's what makes us different." The Red Tails' escort tactics evolved with experience. They created a three-layer defense. Close escort, fighters weaved above and below the bombers, ready to intercept any enemy that broke through. Medium escort, planes positioned 1,000 feet above the formation, stopping incoming fighters before they reached the bombers. High escort, fighters flying 5,000 feet up, watching for diving attacks from German jets or fighters. It took precise coordination and unshakable discipline, qualities the Red Tails had honed in training. The Tuskegee Airmen fought two wars at once, against fascism abroad, and racism at home. Their combat record challenged both Nazi ideology and American segregation, proving that excellence in the air didn't depend on skin color. While they shot down German fighters over Europe, they battled prejudice in the U.S. military, white officers who doubted them, segregated bases that treated them as second-class citizens, and a War Department that refused to publicize their wins. Their victories made headlines in black newspapers like the Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier, and Baltimore Afro-American, but mainstream papers like the New York Times and Chicago Tribune barely mentioned them. The Pittsburgh Courier's WWII campaign, Victory Against Fascism Abroad, Victory Against Racism at Home, used the Tuskegee Airmen as proof of Black Americans' contributions to the war. The contrast with German awareness was stark. By 1945, the Luftwaffe had detailed intel on the Red Tails, their call signs, bases, and tactics, and called them by name. Meanwhile, many white Americans had no idea black pilots even existed. It was deliberate ignorance. The War Department feared upsetting segregationists in Congress and the military. Victory in Europe in May 1945 brought uncertainty, not celebration, for the Tuskegee Airmen. White units prepared for victory parades and homecomings, but the 332nd faced questions about its future. The USAF planned to keep segregation, even though the Red Tails' record proved it was absurd. For decades after the war, their achievements were mostly forgotten. Individual pilots struggled with the erasure. Lee Archer, who had 4 confirmed wins, became a food company executive but rarely talked about his service. "Nobody believed me anyway," he told a historian in 1995. A black fighter pilot? People thought I was lying. Change came slowly. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, formally integrating the U.S. military. It was a decision directly influenced by the Tuskegee Airmen's combat record. Benjamin Davis, Jr., who led the Red Tails over Berlin, became the Air Force's first black general in 1954, breaking another racial barrier. National recognition came even later. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor in the U.S., to the Tuskegee Airmen. Only 300 of the original pilots survived to attend the ceremony in Washington, D.C. Many had waited over 60 years to be honored for their service. Their journey from mockery to respect wasn't a myth, it was fact. The numbers don't lie: 112 aerial victories, 3 jets shot down in one mission, 150 ground kills, 27 bombers lost, versus 46 average, 96 distinguished flying crosses. The men the Germans called Schwarz-Vogelmänner proved that prejudice can't stand against undeniable skill. Every German fighter they shot down, every bomber they protected, every mission they completed added to one unshakable truth: the color of a pilot's skin has nothing to do with his ability to fly and fight. Roscoe Brown, who shot down that Me-262 over Berlin, summed up their legacy best: "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred. And we won all 3 battles." The Tuskegee Airmen didn't just win battles, they changed history. They fought 3 wars and won them all, defeating the Luftwaffe, challenging Nazi racism, and helping end segregation in the U.S. military. When given the chance to fly and fight, they soared, turning mockery into respect, prejudice into acceptance, and enemies into witnesses to their greatness. Their legacy lives on not just in the stats, but in the barriers they broke for future generations of black servicemen and women. They proved that skill, courage, and perseverance can overcome even the darkest injustice.